I love this question from Cheryl. Why don't all people have mold illness? So I'm going to answer that by sharing some stories, because I think it's important with what I typically see. This is my world and this is my experience. But usually what I see, and I'm going to be very generic here, wife gets sick. From being sick, wife goes to doctors, multiple doctors, right? Nobody's figured out why she's sick. She's been called crazy. She's been called depressed. She's been told it's all in her head. So she gets sent to the shrink, right? So she tries the antidepressants and even some of the other medicines that are sometimes thrown out for a variety of different symptoms like fatigue and muscle pain and other things. And she doesn't get better, and so she stays frustrated. And then she finds a doctor who actually does a deep investigation, and they find a mold issue. Now, in this scenario, a lot of times the wife stays home and the husband goes to work. So just in and of itself right there, husband's typically gone. He has 12 less hours of exposure if it's in the home, right? If the home is moldy, the husband has half the exposure on a given daily basis of the level of that the wife is exposed to. Again, there are variances within this. I know I'm generalizing here. It does not say the wife only stays home and never leaves the house, but as a general rule of thumb, the husband goes to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week for the most part. And if he's a really hardworking guy, he's probably working 12-hour days or 14-hour days, and so he's gone a lot more, and the wife stays in the environment. Now, I've seen cases where this was absolutely the truth, and the wife gets so sick, right, that then the husband stays home to take care of her, to take care of the wife, right? And then what happens to the husband? The husband starts to develop a mold issue. And I've seen this be the case a number of times where a husband didn't believe a wife until he stayed home to be a caretaker and started to get sick himself. So that's a variable, that's a factor, certainly. Why is it then, so let's say that's not your variable. Let's say there are other variables. What are the other variables involved here? The biggest variable involved in whether or not somebody gets sick in mold is resiliency. And what is resiliency based on? It's based on your age, your diet, your behavior, how much sunshine you get, how much exercise you get, whether or not you drink alcohol, right? Whether or not you take illicit drugs. And that includes prescription drugs, folks. Those things don't make you healthy. If they made you healthier, you wouldn't. If they made you healthier, you wouldn't need them forever, right? So age, diet, behavior, alcohol, drugs, sex. Generally, females are affected more than males. Males are generally more resistant. And so, so mold is a sexist type of illness, if we could call it that. But these are all variables. There certainly are more variables than this. But, for me, one of the things I see very commonly is the genetics as well. Now, you can't change or alter your genetics, but there are some genetic risk factors for mold exposure. Some people, and guess what? Some of those genes are the same genes that make you susceptible to gluten. They're called HLA-DQ genes. And so some of the patterns, the HLA-DQ patterns, are also patterns that would increase your risk for reacting to mold or mold toxins in the environment. So there are all these different variabilities or variables that are taken into consideration. You probably heard this, many of you probably heard this, the canary in the coal mine. So the coal miners used to take canaries down into the mines because the poisonous gases that might bleach out or leach out of the rock, the canary would die first, right? The canary was the early warning sign to get the heck out of the mine because you can't smell the gas. So the canary is the one that reacts first before everyone else reacts. It's the canary is the person that warns all the other people, right? And so when somebody in the house is getting sick in this way, maybe they do have some of these variable factors, but sometimes people are the canaries for other people in the household. I know for me in my house, when we had mold, my wife got really sick. she was our canary. But we were healthy enough going into it that it didn't take us years and years and years to recover like it does for some people. But she was our canary, and she's the one who started pointing out certain things, and then it all started making sense. So it's not that people aren't affected. In my opinion, I don't care who you are, mycotoxins will poison you. So it's kind of like this. Mycotoxins are poison to everyone, but not everybody's mold allergic, right? And depending on how long you get in mycotoxic exposure and what is the dose of exposure that you're getting, and the resilience of the individual is to the distance at which it takes, or the time at which it takes for you to become violently ill or very, very sick as a result of the chronic exposure. Okay. Let's see. Can mold be a trigger for eosinophilic esophagitis? Yes. So this is what I was talking about earlier, Mandy. One of the hallmark symptoms of candidiasis is the EOE. It's where you have candida growing. And that, again, candida is yeast versus mold. Think of mold as more external, something growing outside of you. Think of yeast more internal as a species of mold growing in you. And EOE is a yeast overgrowth. Candidiasis is a common cause of EOE. It can also be a trigger for Hashimoto's. There have been a number of studies that show, remember, candida produces a hyphal wall protein that looks like gluten. We know gluten can emulate or can trigger Hashimoto's, but we also know that candida can as well. How do you get it out of your car? Depends on the extent and how in depth the mold is into your car, but one of the things that has been shown really well to help neutralize. So there's this, when you're trying, this is a whole nother show, but I'll give you just kind of a brief. And that's, if you're trying to neutralize mycotoxins, the number one rule is you've got to identify the mold and get rid of it. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter what you do. If the source of the mold is not dealt with or addressed, then it will continue to push mycotoxins. There are things you can do to detoxify. There are things that you can do to neutralize mycotoxins, but unless you find the source of the mold, which generally means find the source of the excessive moisture, because that's what mold needs. Mold needs moisture and it needs cellulose. It needs those two things, and within 48 hours it can start propagating. So if you've got moisture and mold spores, which you've got mold spores, it's the chronicity of the moisture. So where's that coming from in your car? That has to be found. Once you find that and deal with it, then you can address neutralizing the mycotoxins. And we'll talk more in a later episode about how to do that, but you've got to find it first. You've got to find where it's coming from. How often should your air ducts be cleaned in your home? It depends on your home. And it depends on the amount of debris and dust that your home generates. But a lot of that happens pre-construction, like the way they build homes today. They go in, everything's a dust ball flurry, and they put everything up as fast as possible. And when they're not done building the home yet, but they're running your AC unit while there's still sheetrock dust and all kinds of nonsense in the air, and that's just pulling it right into your air duct. I've seen cases in new construction where there was enough debris in the air ducts. A lot of people don't think that mold can grow in an air duct because it's metal typically, but what happens is all that debris and dust settles in the air duct, and then that mold embeds in that debris, and it can use a lot of that as food, and it can really create a problem. Let's see here. Ozone. Somebody mentioned ozone. You can use ozone, but ozone's not 100% effective against mold. It wouldn't be my first choice for sure, ozone, as far as getting rid of mold. Can harmful mold be on food or grow on food not properly stored? It can. The more your food sits out, the older, the more leftover your food is, there's a greater potential for mold to grow on it. But where we really generally tend to see mold in food and mycotoxins in food, predominantly is in a handful of foods, and one is grains. This is one of the reasons why So many people with a mold problem, when they go grain-free, they see an immediate initial benefit. But grains, another one is coffee, peanuts, and other ground-based legumes. And then number 4 is, let's see, what am I missing here? Grains. Let's see, alcohol. Almost left my mind there. Alcohol is a big one because most alcohols are grain derivative, right? So a lot of your alcohols are taken from grains. And again, mold and mycotoxin and contamination of alcohols is common, very, very common, especially your fermented types of alcohols like your beers, your ciders, and some of the others that are fermented. There's another one, kombucha is another one I don't recommend people consume, although it's a popular health food drink. It's not something I really recommend that people seek out. But these are some of your big ones, right? And even, we could add this. Sugar cane is oftentimes contaminated with mold and its byproduct, sugar. And so if you're avoiding a lot of these, which if you notice, a lot of these are part of the no grain, no pain, avoidance of these is part of the no grain, no pain protocol. And there's a reason why. Remember, the book is not no gluten, no pain, it's no grain, no pain. And mold and mycotoxins are one of the reasons why I write about avoiding those foods in the book. Is there a test for SEERS? No. There's a battery of different types of tests that can help you identify whether or not it's most likely SEERS, but there's not like a SEERS test that you run specifically. Okay, let's see here. I used latex gloves and wore an N95 mask to clean the black mold. Is that good enough? Also rinsed hands with lemon and water. A month passed with no symptoms. I mean, you're okay. It doesn't sound like you got a major contamination exposure that made you sick. Some people do. I've seen cases where people were trying to clean their own mold and got very, very sick. I wouldn't recommend an N95 and latex to try to clean mold. I'd recommend a Tyvek suit and a respirator. I mean, that to me, if you want good protection, that's where it's at. Can mold in the home end up on the food as they cook? Yes, it can, especially the mycotoxins. They're circulating everywhere in the air once you've got a major contamination issue. Does it influence the telomeres or stem cells? Mold inhibits DNA replication. So what is a telomere? The telomere is the end cap to your DNA. As far as stem cells are produced as a result of DNA, protein, and RNA synthesis. So yes, it does. It affects all of those things. How to increase energy levels to heal infection in the gut and raise hemoglobin? That's a pretty specific question. I'd say start with no grain, no pain, Silvana. Start there. Start with diet if you haven't already. That's always the first place to start when you're struggling and you're chronically sick, is diet first, diet and lifestyle. Is moving into a new house best? If so, scroll down. How do you overcome the chemicals from off-gassing from the new building material? Anything more than airing it out in purifiers? So moving into a new house is not always best. It can be. It depends on the house that you're moving into and how it was constructed. So one of the problems in the construction industry is, the problem with the success of the United States is that look, I'm going to try not to offend anybody's heirs here today, but the reality is, I am a fan of capitalism, but what I am not a fan of is taking people's money and yielding them or giving them something that's inferior, or doing something to them that's inferior that might even harm them, right? Which I look at mainstream hospitals and medicine as that, right? It's a money-based system where the care and the concern is really the backseat to the profits. That's not what capitalism is supposed to be. Capitalism with good ethics and good morals is a great thing, but in today's world, everything is all about the bottom dollar. And what happens is you get these big companies that have huge overhead that want to build things as quickly as they possibly can, paying the cheapest quantity of dollars and cheapest labor they can find. And so a lot of times they get unqualified, unskilled workers to do the work. And if that's what your new construction was built upon, then yes, you can create a major issue, or you can move into a new home and still have a major issue. It happened to me. It's part of what happened when we built a home. We within inside a couple of years, we had more than 100,000 spore counts of black mold growing in our wall. So it definitely, new construction is not necessarily the safest, but it's all about the construction industry. And as far as off-gassing, part two to that question, the best thing that you can do is try to let the house breathe. And so air purification with high efficiency HEPA, ultrafine HEPA air filters, probably one of the best things that you can do. Now, if you're extremely chemical sensitive, you might wait to move into a new home. I mean, depending on if you're trying to get out of mold into a new home, it's a little bit different because you want to get out of that home as quickly as possible. But if you are if you're just trying to find a place and you have a little bit of time, you might wait to move into that home and let it outgas, let it outgas for a few months before you move right in. Are we more susceptible to get mold issues if we eat gluten and are sensitive to gluten? You're more susceptible to have a worse reaction to mold because your immune system is battling gluten. And remember, your immune system also has to protect you from mold exposure as well. And so think of eating gluten, if you're gluten sensitive, as a distraction from your immune system being able to do its job with mold. I'm on an immunosuppressive for lupus. Should I stop the infusion? I can't answer that question. That's a question you need to ask your doctor directly. I had surgery to remove the mold in my sinus. I'm having an MRI to check my brain because I've had such a headache since the surgery on March 10th. So again, the immunosuppressive, that again, I would talk to your doctor about that. If you've got mold in your sinuses and you're on an immunosuppression drug, then your doctor should absolutely have access to that information so that the two of you can come to the best decision about what you need. Let's see. Keep going down. Oh, somebody asked, what did I do about the mold? I had mold that was growing in one of my walls behind an ice maker that was improperly connected, and we tore it all out and we remediated it. We sealed off that area, quarantined that area of the house, and we had a remediation team come out and do the work. I don't recommend trying to clean your own mold. It's just, unless you're a professional mold remediator, I mean, I just don't recommend it. There's an art to every expertise. Unless you have that expertise, I'd say it's something you should try to avoid doing. Is ERMI best test for new build? I think ERMI is a good screening tool, Tiffany. The best test is, before you invest all that money in buying a home, is have a good mold investigator just come out and do decent, thorough checkup. Because then you have a liability chain, right? When you have a liability. The thing about worrying about a new home and everything is you want to create a liability chain with the builder. You want to create a liability chain with a mold inspector, and that way, if somebody missed it and your family ends up a year and a half inside a home and you're sick, there's a chain of liability where you showed beyond a reasonable doubt that your concern was mold and that you actually paid experts and professionals to come out and verify that the construction was okay and that there wasn't a mold issue. That's the best way that you can protect yourself, is to create a liability chain if you're buying a new home. If you're buying a used home, there really isn't much protection in that, unless there's pre-existing mold in the home and the person selling you the home doesn't disclose that it's there. But a lot of times, you buy a house and the owner didn't know it was there, or there was no discernible mold that was identified when your inspector went through. So it's not a perfect scenario, and I know that's frustrating for a lot of you. But an ERMI is a great screening test. If I were going to do an ERMI on a home that I was seeing built, I would want that ERMI score to be less than 2.5, or I would walk. And I know it's a crazy market right now in terms of real estate, but it's not worth moving into a place that makes you sick. Can mold cause low blood counts? It can. Mold can cause low red counts, low white counts, low platelets. Mold inhibits stem cell progenesis in your bone marrow, and this is one of the reasons why it's commonly linked to hematological disorders of the blood, if you will. And I see it on a regular basis in folks where they've been to hematologists and their blood counts are low, and they find the mold, right? And they get out of the mold and they see a rebound in their blood counts. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.